You've been on one of these rides. Strapped in, bar clicks down, operator gives the thumbs up. And in that moment, that 2-second window before the drop, before the launch, before you're hurtling through the air at 60 miles an hour, you're trusting a stranger checked every bolt. Trusting someone you'll never meet decided the safety sensor was calibrated right. Trusting a corporation chose your life over a $35 ticket. Most of the time, that trust is earned. But sometimes it isn't. What you're about to see isn't a list of freak accidents. It's a pattern. Exposed restraints, ignored warnings, cover-ups that only come to light because someone's family refused to stay quiet. 10 incidents, 4 tiers. And by the time we reach the bottom, you'll understand why the happiest places on Earth fight so hard to keep these stories buried. This video contains real footage and detailed descriptions of fatal and life-altering theme park incidents. Viewer discretion is advised. Tier 1. The surface. The ones you might remember. These are the incidents that made national news. The ones that trended on Twitter for a week, got covered by every major outlet, sparked outrage, and then faded. You probably saw the headlines. You probably felt that brief flash of horror before scrolling past. But there's a difference between seeing a headline and understanding what actually happened, how it happened, why it was allowed to happen. So let's start with a name you might recognize. Tyree Sampson. March 24, 2022, Icon Park, Orlando, Florida. Tyree Sampson was 14 years old, a football player for St. Louis. The kind of kid coaches build programs around. 6'5", over 300 pounds, traveled to Florida with his team for a tournament. After practice, they went to Icon Park. Tyree wanted to ride Freefall. Freefall was the park's newest attraction, a drop tower standing over 400 feet tall, billed as the world's tallest freestanding drop ride. Riders are lifted to the top, tilted forward until they're facing straight down, and released. 75 miles per hour, 4 seconds of free fall. The restraint system wasn't a lap bar. It was an over-the-shoulder harness that clicked into place between the rider's legs. If the harness didn't reach the safe zone, the ride wouldn't operate. That was the safeguard. Tyree got in line with his friends. He sat down in seat 1, the harness came down. It didn't click the way it should have. Here's what Tyree didn't know. The ride had a weight limit, 287 pounds. He was well over that. But there was no scale at the entrance, no one checking. And months earlier, someone had solved the problem of oversized guests a different way. The harness sensors on 2 seats, including seat 1, had been manually adjusted. The proximity tolerance was widened. Gaps that should have triggered a lockout were now acceptable. The ride would operate even if the harness wasn't fully secured. The operators didn't know this had been done. They weren't told. They just knew the ride worked, so they ran it. Witnesses said you could see space between the harness and Tyree's body. The operator looked at him, looked at the gap, and gave the thumbs up. The ride launched. 14 riders went up 400 feet. On the way down, Tyree Sampson fell out of his seat. He dropped over 70 feet and hit the pavement near the base of the tower. His friends were still trapped in above him, screaming. He was pronounced dead at the hospital, 14 years old. Here's what happened after. Investigators found the sensor adjustment. They found maintenance logs showing the issue was known. They found that the ride had passed inspection, none of which flagged the modification. And they found that Tyree wasn't the first person to almost fall. Other riders had reported feeling loose in the same seat. Nothing was done. The family didn't stay quiet. Tyree's mother, Nakia Dodd, became the face of the fight. Press conferences, interviews, legislative testimony. She named names. She demanded accountability. She pushed for laws that would require standardized safety regulations across Florida's amusement industry. In 2023, a jury awarded the Sampson family $310 million, the largest wrongful death verdict in Florida theme park history. Freefall was demolished. The lot sits empty now. But here's what stays with you. The sensor was adjusted so bigger guests could ride, not for safety, for capacity, for throughput, for revenue. The operator saw the gap and let him go anyway. And Tyree Sampson, a kid on a trip with his football team, trusted that someone had checked. Tyler Jarrell. The opening night at the Ohio State Fair is a specific kind of chaos. July 26, 2017. The sun is setting over Columbus. The Midway is packed. Teenagers in groups, couples sharing funnel cakes, parents pushing strollers past rigged carnival games. The air smells like livestock and grease and sugar. Music blares from every direction, competing for attention. Tyler Jarrell was 18 years old, just graduated from Westerville North High School. Football player, good grades, big smile in every photo. He'd enlisted in the Marines a few weeks earlier. Boot camp was coming. Paris Island, the next chapter. But that was later. Tonight was about the fair. One last summer night with friends before everything changed. They got in line for the Fireball. The Fireball was a pendulum ride, the kind that swings back and forth in growing arcs while the circular gondola spins. 24 seats arranged in a ring, riders facing outward, feet dangling. Not the most extreme attraction on the Midway. Not the one that makes you sign a waiver. Just a solid crowd pleaser that had been traveling the fair circuit for nearly 20 years. City to city, state to state. Assembled and disassembled dozens of times each season. Tyler and his friends climbed in. Lap bars came down. The ride started its arc. Higher, higher, spinning while it swung. The centrifugal force pinning you to your seat, the world tilting at angles it shouldn't. And then, at the peak of a swing, maybe 40 feet in the air, the gondola tore apart. Not the lap bars, not the seats, the structure itself. One entire section of the passenger compartment sheared away from the ride and flew into the crowd. Riders still strapped in, still holding the bars, suddenly airborne in a piece of machinery that was no longer attached to anything. Tyler was thrown. He hit the Midway pavement. He was dead before the paramedics arrived. 7 others were injured, some critically. Around them, the fair kept spinning. Other rides still running. Music still playing. People who hadn't seen it yet still laughing. Still walking toward the Midway. Still thinking it was going to be a normal night. Here's what killed Tyler Jarrell. A support beam. One piece of metal connecting the passenger gondola to the spinning mechanism. Critical. Load-bearing. The thing that kept the ride from becoming shrapnel. It had rotted from the inside out. Years of moisture getting trapped in the steel. Rust eating through the walls where no one could see it. By the time of the accident, some sections of that beam had lost nearly 80% of their original thickness. From the outside, it looked fine. Paint covered everything. The welds were intact. The bolts were tight. But inside, where it mattered, the metal was paper. The Fireball had been inspected that same day. A state official from the Ohio Department of Agriculture, which oversees ride safety at the fair, walked through the checklist. Visual inspection, documentation review, standard procedure. It passed. The paperwork was signed, the ride opened to the public. 4.5 hours later, the beam failed. Here's the thing about that inspection. It was never going to catch this. Visual checks don't see internal corrosion. Nobody was cutting beams open. Nobody was running ultrasonic tests on the steel. The inspection protocol assumed that if a ride looked fine, it probably was fine. That assumption killed Tyler Jarrell. The Fireball was manufactured by a Dutch company called KMG. It had been operating on the American Fair Circuit since 1998. Almost 2 decades of assembly and disassembly, transport and setup, wear and tear. Every time it moved, the structure took stress. Every time it ran, the forces accumulated. Every time it sat in a truck crossing state lines, moisture got into places it shouldn't. The corrosion had been building for years, invisible, inevitable, waiting for the night it finally gave way. After the accident, KMG issued a bulletin to every operator worldwide. Stop running the Fireball until further notice. Check the support beams. Actually check them. Not a glance and a signature, but real inspection. What they found was widespread corrosion. Multiple units, multiple states, the same failure waiting to happen. Tyler was just the first. The aftermath was chaos and lawsuits. Ohio launched a statewide investigation. Tyler's family sued. So did others. By the time the settlements were reached, the total payouts exceeded $78 million. And Ohio passed Tyler's Law, named for the 18-year-old Marine who never made it to boot camp. The legislation imposed stricter inspection requirements for amusement rides at fairs and carnivals, more documentation, more engineering oversight, third-party testing. It was the first major overhaul of Ohio's ride safety regulations in decades, because it took a kid dying on opening night for anyone to look at how the rules actually worked. He sat down on a ride that had passed inspection 4 hours earlier, and he trusted, the way everyone trusts, that someone had actually checked. So that's Tier 1, the surface. The cases in Tier 2 are different. These made headlines too, for a day, maybe two. Local news covered them, a few national outlets picked them up, and then they vanished. Not because they were less horrific, some of them were worse. Now, let's move on to Tier 2. Tier 2, below the waterline, the ones they forgot. Rosa Esparza. It feels loose. 3 words, that's all she said. Standing on the platform of the Texas Giant, lap bar across her legs, waiting for the ride to start. The operator heard her, looked at the restraint, gave it a push. Thumbs up, train dispatched. 75 feet later, Rosa Esparza was dead. July 19, 2013, Six Flags over Texas, Arlington. Rosa was 52, a grandmother, the kind who shows up when her family asks for things. That day, her family wanted to ride the Texas Giant together. Rosa didn't do roller coasters, never had, but she wasn't going to sit on a bench while everyone else had fun. So she got in line. The Texas Giant was a hybrid coaster, a classic wooden structure from 1990, rebuilt in 2011 with a steel track. Faster, steeper, more intense. The restraint system was a single lap bar that came down over both legs and clicked into a ratchet. Rosa sat down. The bar came down, and she knew something wasn't right. She didn't know what a roller coaster restraint was supposed to feel like. She'd never been on one, but she knew her own body. She knew when something wasn't secure. So she said something. And here's what the operator saw. A nervous woman. First-time rider. Probably anxious. Probably overthinking it. The lap bar clicked. The light turned green. Everything looked fine. So they moved on. 20 other guests to check. A line backing up in the summer heat. Throughput to maintain. The train climbed the first hill, dropped, twisted through the layout at 50 miles per hour. On a turn called the tunnel drop, the forces pulled Rosa out of her seat. She fell 75 feet and hit a metal support beam. Her family was still in the train when it happened, still locked in their seats, still moving through the course while the seat next to them sat empty. Here's what the investigation found. The Texas Giant's lap bar system had a flaw. For larger riders, the bar couldn't reach the same locking position. It would click into an earlier notch, technically locked, but with more space between the bar and the body. More room to shift, more room to slide. Rosa wasn't a small woman. The bar clicked. The computer registered it as secure. It wasn't. And she'd told someone. She'd said the words out loud to the person whose only job was to make sure she was safe. They didn't listen. Six Flags did what corporations do. They disputed the findings. They said the restraint functioned properly. They implied Rosa must have shifted in her seat, moved during the ride, done something that caused herself to fall. They blamed her. The family sued. The case settled. Terms confidential. And Six Flags made changes, quietly. They added seatbelts to every seat on the Texas Giant, a secondary restraint, a backup for the lap bar that had already proven it could fail. They never admitted fault. They didn't have to. The seatbelts admitted it for them. The Texas Giant is still running. You can ride it today. They'll strap you in with a lap bar and a seatbelt and send you up that first hill. And if something feels wrong, if the restraint doesn't sit right, if there's space that shouldn't be there, you might think about saying something. But you'll probably stay quiet because the operator already checked, because the light turned green, because surely someone would stop the ride if it wasn't safe. Rosa didn't stay quiet. She said the words, "It feels loose," and they sent her up anyway. Alton Towers Smiler. The Smiler was 2 years old, a showpiece, 14 inversions, more than any roller coaster on Earth. Yellow track twisted into impossible shapes, designed to disorient, to overwhelm, to make you feel like you'd lost control. That afternoon, a train stopped mid-course. Technical fault. Not unusual, coasters have sensors, brakes, fail-safes. When something doesn't read right, the ride stops itself. The problem was what happened next. Staff couldn't get the train moving. The computer wouldn't let them. So they did what they'd been trained to do when the computer got in the way. They switched to manual override. Manual mode exists for maintenance, for testing, for situations where a human needs to move a train without the system interfering. It's not supposed to be used while guests are on the ride. They used it anyway. Here's what manual mode does. It tells the computer to stop thinking, stop tracking, stop preventing. The sensors still need the stalled train. The system still knows it's there. But in manual mode, that information doesn't matter. The human is in charge now. The human pressed dispatch. A second train, 16 passengers, launched up the lift hill. Through the first inversion, accelerating through the layout toward the section of track where the first train was sitting motionless in the dark. They collided at 20 miles per hour. 20 doesn't sound fast. It's fast enough to crush a leg between two trains, fast enough to shatter a kneecap, fast enough to change someone's body forever. The front row of the moving train crumpled into the back of the stationary one. Metal into metal, bodies thrown forward against restraints that weren't designed for head-on impacts. 16 people injured, 5 critically. The investigation found what investigations always find. This wasn't a freak accident. It was a culture. Operators had been using manual override routinely. Whenever the computer flagged an error, whenever the system wouldn't cooperate, they'd switch to manual and keep the line moving. It was faster. It kept throughput up. It avoided the hassle of calling maintenance for every small glitch. The safety system worked perfectly. The humans kept turning it off. Merlin Entertainments, the company that owns Alton Towers, pleaded guilty to health and safety breaches. The judge called the failures catastrophic. They were fined £5 million, the largest penalty ever imposed on a UK theme park. The Smiler reopened 4 months later. Here's the thing about the Smiler. Every automated safeguard did exactly what it was supposed to do. The sensors detected the stalled train. The computer refused to dispatch. The system said no. And a human said yes. Because the queue was long. Because the guests were waiting. Because fixing it properly meant slowing down. The computer knew there was a train on the track. Someone pressed the button anyway. Caitlin Lassiter. A steel cable under tension doesn't just break. It releases. All that stored energy, the weight of a passenger car, the force of a 200-foot drop, unleashed in a fraction of a second. The cable whips. It moves faster than the eye can track. And if you're in its path, you don't see it coming. June 21st, 2007. Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom, Louisville. Caitlin Lassiter was 13 years old. Summer break had just started. She went to the park with her mother and younger sister. A normal day. The kind you forget about by the following week. Caitlin wanted to ride the Superman Tower of Power. Drop towers are simple machines. A passenger car, a central column, a cable system that hoists you to the top and controls your descent. The Superman Tower of Power stood 217 feet tall. Riders strapped in, feet dangling, and got lifted straight up before plummeting back down at 54 miles per hour. The cables did all the work. Steel braided lines under constant tension, raising and lowering thousands of pounds dozens of times a day. Cables wear. It's expected. The friction, the load, the repetition. Over time, the fibers fray. Maintenance crews are supposed to inspect them, replace them when the wear hits a certain threshold. That's the system. That's how it's supposed to work. Caitlin sat down. The harness came over her shoulders. The ride launched. At some point during the cycle, on the way up or the way down, the reports vary. The cable failed. It didn't just snap, it whipped. Caitlin's feet were dangling 200 feet in the air. The cable tore through both of them. 13 years old. One moment you're screaming with everyone else, stomach dropping, hands gripping the harness. The next moment something hits you and you look down and your feet are gone. Not injured, gone. The ride returned to the station. Caitlin was rushed to the hospital. Surgeons worked for hours. They managed to reattach her right foot. A partial success, function limited but present. Her left leg couldn't be saved. They amputated below the knee. Her shoes were still on the platform, still laced, still sitting where they'd landed. Here's what the investigation found. The cable hadn't failed suddenly. It had been failing for a long time. Fraying, weakening, losing straps one by one while the ride kept operating. The inspections kept passing, and nobody pulled it offline. Cable wear is measurable. There are tools, ultrasonic testing, visual inspections, protocols, tension monitoring that can tell you exactly how much life is left in a steel line. You can predict failure before it happens. Someone looked at that cable, maybe multiple someones, over multiple inspections, and they decided it had more time. Another day, another week, another few thousand cycles. They were wrong. Six Flags did what Six Flags does. They pointed the fingers at the manufacturer. The manufacturer pointed back. Lawsuits piled up. Caitlin's family, other riders, everyone looking for someone to hold accountable. The Superman Tower of Power was never reopened. Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom eventually closed entirely, sold off after years of declining attendance. The park reopened under new ownership in 2014. The tower didn't come back. Caitlin received a settlement, confidential terms. Enough, presumably, to cover a lifetime of prosthetics, physical therapy, medical care for a body that was permanently altered at 13 because maintenance decided a fraying cable could wait. She's in her 30s now. More than half her life lived with what happened on that platform. Learning to walk again, learning to explain to people why she moves the way she moves, adapting to a body that someone else broke. And here's what I keep coming back to. Cable failure is predictable. It's not a mystery. It's not a freak event that comes out of nowhere. The wear is visible. The degradation is measurable. You can know with reasonable certainty when a cable is going to fail. Someone saw the wear and made a decision. Not a dramatic decision, not a villain twirling a mustache, just the quiet routine math of keeping a ride operational. The cable's worn, but it's probably fine. We'll replace it next month, next quarter, next time. Caitlin Lassiter, 13 years old, feet dangling in the summer air, trusted that someone had checked. Someone had. They just decided it could wait. So that's Tier 2, below the waterline. Now, Tier 3 is where the cover-ups live. These are the ones where we weren't supposed to know what really happened. Internal reports that only surfaced because of lawsuits. Decisions made in boardrooms and maintenance offices that only came to light because a family refused to accept tragic accident as the answer. And the first one involves a water slide that should never have been built. Tier 3, the murky middle. The cover-ups. Caleb Schwab. Caleb Schwab was 10 years old, son of a Kansas state legislator. Brown hair, big smile, the kind of kid who begged to go on the big rides. The park was hosting Elected Officials Day, a promotional event where politicians and their families got free admission. Caleb's father, Representative Scott Schwab, brought the family out for an afternoon. Caleb wanted to ride Verrückt. Verrückt, German for insane, was the tallest water slide in the world. 17 stories, 168 feet, taller than Niagara Falls. You climbed a tower the height of a 15-story building, sat in a raft with 2 other people, and dropped at speeds exceeding 65 miles per hour. It was the park's crown jewel, a Guinness World Record holder, the ride that put Schlitterbahn, Kansas City on the map. Caleb got in line with 2 women, family friends acting as the required additional weight for the 3-person raft. They climbed the tower, sat in the raft, pushed off. Caleb Schwab never made it to the bottom. Here's what the public was told. A tragic accident, an unforeseeable malfunction, thoughts and prayers. Here's what actually happened. The raft went airborne, halfway down the slide at the crest of a hump designed to give riders a moment of weightlessness. The entire raft lifted off the track. It caught the overhead safety net, the hoops installed over the slide to prevent exactly this scenario. The netting didn't save Caleb, it killed him. The raft hit the hoop, Caleb's head hit the netting. The impact decapitated him. He was 10 years old. Here's what the investigation found. Verrückt was never safe. From the beginning. The slide was designed not by engineers, but by the park's co-owner, Jeff Henry, a man with no formal engineering credentials. He'd built Schlitterbahn's brand on pushing limits, on building rides no one else would attempt. Verrückt was his masterpiece, and he rushed it. The slide was announced in 2012. Construction began before the design was finalized. They were building and testing simultaneously, adjusting the structure as they went. During testing, the rafts went airborne repeatedly. Not once, not twice, over and over again. Test runs with sandbags showed the bags flying off the slide entirely. The weights would catch the netting, rip through it, scatter across the park. Engineers, the ones Schlitterbahn did eventually consult, raised concerns. They documented the problems. They warned that the design was unstable, that the physics didn't work, that riders could be seriously hurt. The slide opened anyway. Here's where it gets worse. After Caleb's death, investigators discovered that Schlitterbahn had falsified inspection records. Kansas didn't require state inspections for amusement rides. The industry was self-regulated. Parks inspected themselves, filed their own paperwork, vouched for their own safety. Schlitterbahn's records showed Verrückt passing inspection after inspection. Everything in order, nothing to see here. The records were lies. The rafts had been going airborne for years. Staff knew. Management knew. The netting wasn't a safety feature, it was an admission that they expected rafts to leave the slide. They just hoped the netting would catch them. It didn't catch Caleb. The aftermath was a legal disaster. Schlitterbahn faced criminal charges. Jeff Henry and other executives were indicted for second-degree murder. Not negligence, not manslaughter, murder. But the case collapsed. A judge ruled that prosecutors had improperly shared evidence with the grand jury. The charges against Henry were dismissed on procedural grounds. Other executives took plea deals for lesser offenses. No one went to prison for building a slide they knew was dangerous and opening it anyway. The Schwab family sued. They settled. Confidential terms. Verrückt was demolished. Schlitterbahn, Kansas City was sold. And Kansas finally closed the loophole. After Caleb died, the state passed legislation requiring independent inspections of amusement rides. No more self-regulation. No more parks grading their own homework. It took a 10-year-old's decapitation to make that happen. Here's what stays with me. The sandbags flew off during testing. The engineers said it was dangerous. The paperwork was falsified. The netting was installed because they knew the rafts would go airborne. Every single person involved in building and operating that slide knew something was wrong. And they opened it anyway. Because it was a world record. Because it was good for business. Because the line was long and the tickets were selling. Caleb Schwab trusted that someone had checked. Someone had checked. They knew. They just didn't care. Dreamworld Thunder River Rapids. I shudder when I think if there had been guests on that ride. That's a direct quote from a Dreamworld engineer, written in an internal email. The year was 2001, 15 years before anyone died. It was the last week of October 2016, and Queensland schools had just broken up for holidays. Dreamworld, Australia's largest theme park, was doing exactly the kind of business you'd expect. Families driving down from Brisbane, tourists flying in from interstate, kids dragging parents from ride to ride, hopped up on sugar and adrenaline. The Gold Coast sun was out. The queues were long. The park was alive. Thunder River Rapids wasn't the main attraction. It wasn't the roller coaster teenagers lined up for or the thrill ride couples posed in front of. It was the gentle one, the cool-down ride, the place you took grandma, or a nervous 6-year-old, or yourself when your feet hurt and you wanted 20 minutes of floating through fake rapids without anyone screaming in your ear. It had been running since 1986, 30 years, no fatalities, the kind of ride you stop thinking about because nothing ever went wrong. 6 people climbed into a circular raft that afternoon. 2 seats stayed empty. The river pushed them along, past plastic rocks, through manufactured rapids, around bends designed to feel like adventure without any actual danger. Relaxing, predictable, almost over. Then they reached the conveyor. Here's how the ride worked. At the end of the circuit, rafts floated onto a metal conveyor belt. The belt lifted them out of the water and carried them back to the loading platform. Simple, mechanical. The same system that had been cycling rafts for 3 decades. That afternoon, something jammed. A raft ahead of them had gotten stuck. Water levels dropped. The conveyor malfunctioned. The raft carrying 6 guests floated into the back of the stalled shaft, and the collision tipped them sideways. Not dramatically, just enough. The conveyor was still running. The raft flipped. 4 people were dragged into the conveyor mechanism. Kate Goodchild, 32, mother of 2. Her brother, Luke Dorset, 35. Luke's partner, Ruzi Arigi, 38. Cindy Lowe, 42, mother of 2. They were pulled under, crushed, drowned, killed by a machine that didn't know to stop. 2 children survived. Kate's daughter, 12 years old. Cindy's son, 10. They were on the raft when it flipped. They didn't go under, but they saw their mothers disappear into the mechanism. They heard what a conveyor belt does to a human body. Those kids walked off that ride without their parents. They walked out of that park into a life shaped entirely by what happened in those few seconds. They carry it now. They'll carry it forever. Here's what the coronial inquest uncovered. This had happened before. Not deaths, but the sequence, the malfunction, the collision at the conveyor. In 2001, 15 years earlier, 2 rafts collided at the exact same spot. Same conveyor, same failure mode, same chain of events. The only difference? The rafts were empty that time. A Dreamworld engineer documented the incident, wrote it up, sent an email to colleagues describing what he'd witnessed. "I shudder when I think if there had been guests on that ride." He saw it. He named it. He understood exactly what would happen if people were involved. The email was filed. The conveyor wasn't redesigned. No redundant safety system was installed. No emergency stop was placed within arm's reach of the operator. The ride kept running. For 15 more years, loading families onto rafts, floating them toward the same conveyor, cycling them through the same failure point that an engineer had already flagged as catastrophic. Until it wasn't empty rafts anymore. The inquest found rot at every level. Maintenance logs were incomplete. Safety protocols hadn't been updated in years. Staff training was inadequate. The emergency stop button, the one thing that could have halted the conveyor before it killed anyone, wasn't pressed in time because employees didn't fully understand what was happening. But here's what makes this case different from the others. They didn't just ignore a warning sign. They didn't just miss an inspection. They documented the exact failure that would eventually kill 4 people, and then did nothing for a decade and a half. An engineer wrote it down, put it in an email, used the word shudder, and someone read that email and filed it, and moved on with their day. The aftermath was what it always is. Ardent Leisure pleaded guilty to safety breaches. They were fined 3.6 million Australian dollars. No individual was charged. No executive went to prison. The company wrote a check and moved on. Thunder River Rapids was demolished. A memorial garden stands where the conveyor used to be. And somewhere, probably still archived on a Dreamworld server, that 2001 email exists. I shudder when I think if there had been guests. 15 years later, there were. Now, Tier 4 is different. The people in Tier 4 didn't die because of one bad decision. They died because the entire industry refuses to solve problems it already knows exist. This is where we reach the bottom. Tier 4, the abyss, the patterns. James Hackemer. The rule was clear. Posted at the entrance, printed in the safety guidelines, communicated to every operator working the ride. Riders must have 2 functional legs. Not a suggestion, not a recommendation, a requirement. The restraint system, a lap bar and seatbelt, was engineered assuming the rider could plant their feet against the floor and brace against the forces. Without legs, the geometry fails. The restraint can't do what it was designed to do. July 8, 2011, Darien Lake, Darien, New York. James Hackemer knew the rule. He couldn't have missed it. The absence of his legs wasn't something he could hide. He was in a wheelchair. James was 29 years old, Army Sergeant, 2 tours in Iraq, the kind of soldier who volunteered for the hard deployments, who believed in what he was doing, who came home different than he left. In 2008, an IED exploded beneath his vehicle. He survived. His legs didn't. Both amputated above the knee. 3 years of recovery, learning to navigate a world built for people with bodies that worked differently than his, learning to ask for help, learning when to push back. That summer, he went to Darien Lake with his family, a day at the park, rides and fried food, and a few hours of feeling normal. He wanted to ride the Ride of Steel. The Ride of Steel was a hypercoaster, 208 feet tall, speeds exceeding 70 miles per hour, the kind of ride built around airtime. Those moments where the track drops faster than gravity and your body lifts out of the seat, floating for a half second before the restraint catches you. That floating sensation is the whole point. Controlled ejection, engineers call it. The forces are calculated. The restraints are designed to handle exactly that amount of lift. But the calculation assumes you have legs, assumes your feet are planted, assumes your body has anchor points below the waist. James didn't. He approached the ride entrance. He was in a wheelchair. He transferred himself into the coaster seat, a process that requires upper body strength, coordination, and visibility. The operators watched him do it. They saw him, they knew, and they let him on anyway. Maybe they didn't want to embarrass him. Maybe they'd been yelled at before by guests who felt discriminated against. Maybe they figured the lap bar would be enough. Maybe they just didn't want the confrontation. Telling a veteran who'd lost his legs, serving his country, that he couldn't ride a roller coaster? Whatever the reason, they checked the restraint, saw that it clicked, and gave the signal. The train dispatched. The Ride of Steel has multiple airtime hills, moments designed to pull you out of your seat. For most riders, that's the thrill, the lift, the float, the catch. For James, there was no catch. On one of the hills, the forces exceeded what the lap bar could hold against a body with no legs to anchor it. He came out of the seat. He kept going. He was ejected from the ride at over 70 miles per hour. His body landed on a wooden area outside the fence line near the coaster's layout. Parkgoers found him, called 911. By the time the medics arrived, there was nothing to be done. James Hackemer survived an IED in Iraq. He didn't survive a roller coaster in New York. Here's where it gets complicated. The rule existed. The operators knew it. They saw James transfer from his wheelchair. They saw that he didn't have legs, and they made a choice. Darien Lake's defense was predictable. They argued James had insisted on riding, that he told operators he would be fine, that they were trying to accommodate a disabled veteran, not endanger him. Maybe that's true. Maybe James pushed back when they hesitated. Maybe he said the words that made it easier for them to wave him through. But here's the thing about rules. They exist precisely for the moments when following them is uncomfortable, when saying no feels cruel, when the person in front of you is a veteran in a wheelchair who just wants to ride a roller coaster like everyone else. The rule isn't there for the easy calls. It's there for the hard ones, and the operators folded. No one was criminally charged. James was an adult. He'd made his own choice. He'd pushed to get on the ride. The legal doctrine of assumed risk muddied the waters enough that prosecutors didn't pursue charges. His family sued. They settled for $2.85 million. Darien Lake updated their training procedures, added more signage, reminded operators that the rules weren't suggestions. James Hackemer trusted that someone would stop him if it wasn't safe, that the people running the ride knew better than he did, that if letting him on would kill him, surely someone would say something. Nobody did. The lap bar clicked. The light turned green. The train dispatched. And James Hackemer, who survived a war, trusted the wrong people with his life. Asia Ferguson, June 28, 2008, Six Flags Over Georgia, Austell. Asia Ferguson was 17 years old, rising senior, summer job at the park. She worked there, knew the layout, knew the rides. That afternoon, she wasn't working, she was visiting with friends. Just another guest. They were riding Batman the Ride. Batman was an inverted coaster. The track runs above you, your feet dangle below. Riders are suspended beneath the rail, whipping through loops and corkscrews at 50 miles per hour. The ride has a restricted zone beneath the track, fenced off, posted with warnings. The area where the trains pass overhead, where anything in that space would be hit. Asia lost her hat during the ride. When the train returned to the station, she decided to go get it. The restricted area was protected by 2 fences. Not 1, 2. The first fence surrounded the ride's perimeter. Standard chain link, warning signs posted. Beyond that, a second fence, closer to the track, marking the actual danger zone. More signs, more warnings. The kind of fencing designed to make you stop and think. Asia climbed both. She was inside the restricted area, under the track, looking for her hat when a train came through. The rider's feet struck her head. She was killed instantly, decapitated by the impact. Here's where the pattern starts. 6 years earlier, 2002, a groundskeeper named Samuel Milton was killed in the exact same spot. Same ride, same restricted zone, same cause of death. Milton was trimming bushes inside the fence. He didn't realize a train was coming. The rider's feet struck him. He died from the injuries. Six Flags knew that location was a kill zone. They'd already had a fatality there. They'd already seen what happens when someone is under the track while the ride is operating. And yet, the fencing was still climbable. The warnings were still just signs. Asia Ferguson, 17 years old, employee of the park, climbed 2 fences and died in the same place Samuel Milton had died 6 years earlier. Same spot, same ride, same failure. Here's what the investigation found. Six Flags wasn't legally liable for Asia's death. She trespassed. She ignored posted warnings. She made a choice that put her in danger. No charges were filed against the park. No fines. No redesign mandated. Her family sued. The case settled, terms undisclosed. And Six Flags made changes, eventually. They added sensors, improved the fencing, installed systems that would stop the ride if someone entered the restricted zone. But only after 2 people died in the same place. Here's the question this case forces you to ask. If a location kills someone, and you know it killed someone, and you don't make it impossible for anyone else to get there, what happens next is predictable. Not certain, not inevitable, but predictable. People are stupid. People are impulsive. A 17-year-old who loses her hat doesn't run a risk-benefit analysis. She just wants her hat back. You can't legislate common sense. You can't fence out every bad decision. But you can make the bad decision harder. You can make the kill zone unreachable. Six Flags didn't. For 6 years, they knew that spot was lethal. They'd buried an employee who died there, and the fencing stayed climbable. The warnings stayed ignorable. Asia Ferguson made a stupid choice, a choice that was entirely her fault. And she made it in a place where someone had already died making the same one. The park knew. They didn't fix it. That's the pattern. So that's Tier 4, the abyss. These aren't isolated tragedies. They're systemic failures wearing different faces. The same mistakes, the same oversights, the same refusal to fix problems that have already killed people. Someone knew. Someone always knew. The sensor was adjusted. The cable was fraying. The sandbags flew off during testing. The engineer wrote an email. The first victim was already in the ground. They knew, and they didn't fix it, because fixing it was expensive, because fixing it was inconvenient, because the line was long and the tickets were selling, and it was probably fine. It's probably fine. That's the phrase that kills people. 4 tiers. Restraints that didn't restrain. Inspections that didn't inspect. Warnings that were documented, filed, and forgotten. And at the center of it all, every single time, a person who trusted that someone had checked. You trust strangers with your life. Most of the time, that trust is earned. But sometimes, it isn't. And when it isn't, when the cable snaps, or the harness fails, or the train collides with another train that shouldn't have been there, you don't get a refund. You don't get a do-over. And somewhere, right now, Someone is sitting down in a seat, pulling a harness over their shoulders, and trusting that someone checked. Maybe someone did. Maybe. Thanks for watching. If this video taught you something, subscribe. It helps more than you know. I'll see you in the next one.